Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to show you how to plant out sweet pea plants. So this video isn't about how to germinate them, but it's how to instruct you how to plant them out, either if you germinated them yourself or if you bought them from a shop like these plants here. So when you're buying sweet pea plants, they come in various different ways. They can come in individual pots, or they can come like this where you have several plants in one pot. Now you could just plant this straight out in the garden, but the thing is you'd probably only get a real tangled mess of plants, and if you separate these plants you can get a lot more potential from them. So first of all, before separating them, there's something else that you need to do to really encourage them to be thicker, stronger plants. So this is what your sweet peas should look like. This is quite a good example of some sweet peas that have been grown well and you've got them from a good supplier, because you can see here they're quite nice bushy plants. The gaps, which is the internode between the leaves, isn't too long, so they're not too leggy. So this has been grown in good conditions, not too warm, and plenty of light. So these are the kind of plants that you're looking for. But sometimes you can get some really leggy ones where the growth gets really tall, and that's not what you're looking for. So when you're picking the plants, try and go for something like this. Nice bushy looking plants, really quite healthy and not any really long leggy growth from them. But what you should do is you should then prune them back with some scissors, and this really helps to thicken the plants up. So as they are at the moment, you can see they are just individual stems, each plant. It does look like it's a bushy plant, but it's actually probably about 10 or 12 individual plants. So this, if I pull this to the side here, you can see better an individual plant. You got here quite a thin stem, and you have actually got right down the bottom here some dormant shoots waiting to grow. So what you want to do is cut off the first few leaves, leaving probably the last two sets of leaves, so that they come in sets, so it looks like 4 leaves, but these are more like 2 leaves at the bottom here. And that way you'll get a much bushier plant. What the plant will then do is, instead of putting all its energy into new shoots and leaves, it will refocus its energy into roots. It will thicken up its root system, and then it will send up new shoots from the base, and the new shoots will be much thicker. So sometimes it sends up the new shoots from the one developing here, other times it will grow new shoots from where the leaves are. So I'll go ahead now and I'll prune these back, and I'll just talk about where to prune them. So we use this plant again as an example, as it's standing out, it's easier to see. So we can see these leaves are still forming, and there's some new ones at the top there, but we want to cut it back to about, as I say, 2 sets of leaves. Anywhere between 2 and 4 sets of leaves is fine. 2 sets is quite good if you've got plants that are a bit smaller. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to follow the stem down, and where it meets the other set of leaves I'm going to cut it off just at this point here. The reason for that is this can't send side shoots up from the section of stem here. It can only send up new shoots from where the leaves attach to the stem. So in the stems of sweet pea plants, they have some dormant buds that you can't see, but they're only located right where the leaves attach to the stem. So if I cut it up at the top here, like so, you would just be left with a dead bit of stem at the top here, and the new growth would appear from the bottom. So what you want to do is cut it off right above where you have some leaves appearing, and then you'll get some nice shoots coming up from there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead with the rest of this plant and cut them all back to a similar level, and that will encourage them to have much bushier growth. So you might also get some slightly leggier specimens like this one here. You can see there's quite a bit of space before there's any leaves, and then we just got these new set coming up here. So I'm just going to cut the very top set off, because I want to have at least 2 sets of leaves left. You really need to have some leaves left. The plant needs it for photosynthesis, so it can get the energy to grow its roots and grow new shoots. But there will also be dormant shoots lower down as well. So always make sure you have at least 2 sets of leaves. And as I say, if you have larger plants, you can actually leave about 4 sets if you want. So that's all these plants now cut back. Now sweet peas are slightly poisonous, so I would recommend washing your hands if you do cut them and get any sap on your hands, or wear gloves as well. That's another way to just protect yourself. And what you'll find now is the plants will sit there, there won't be any obvious growth. The growth will be happening underground, the roots will be getting thicker. The stems should then thicken as well. That's one of the things you'll really notice, is you get much thicker stems. These are very thin stems at the moment, and then you'll get some new growth, and that new growth should be a lot thicker and a lot stronger than the existing growth. Now, as well as getting a bushier, stronger looking plant, what you'll also get is a lot more shoots. So with each sweet pea plant, if you were just to leave it, often they just grow that one shoot, and it just grows up a long spindly kind of plant, and you get a very tall plant, but it doesn't cover a lot of your structure that you want to cover, and you don't get a huge number of flowers. You might get slightly bigger flowers, but they don't get that many of them. Whereas cutting this back like this, you should get between 2 and 4 new shoots. Then those shoots will grow up almost as tall as that one individual shoot, but you'll have 3 or 4 times as many shoots. So you'll get a much bigger plant in general and much more flowers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this under a time lapse so you can watch it develop. And as I say, what you'll see is not much at first. We should get some new shoots coming from lower down, a thickening of the stems, and we'll just get a much bushier, healthier plant. Then I'll see you later on after the time lapse, and we'll talk about how to plant them out and how to separate the plants. So it's just under 2 weeks later, and as you can see from that time lapse, it's grown quite a bit since then. It starts off quite slow, but then it does really take off after the new shoots have appeared. So when you're allowing it to grow, make sure it's in a nice sunny position, ideally not too warm so it doesn't get too leggy. Keep it nice and cool so that when you plant it outside, it doesn't have too much shock. And if you can, keep it in somewhere like an unheated greenhouse, that would be ideal. So here it is now, and it has grown quite well, as you can see. I can show you this plant on the left, which I was showing you earlier, and I can show you the difference in how much it has thickened up. So in the first part of the video, this plant, you can see the original stem was the stem in the middle. It was quite thin, quite short. The new stems are the two that have come out the base, one here and the other one here. You can see the stems are much thicker than the original stem, and the plant itself is much taller now and is growing quite thickly. So you can see there that nearly every plant has at least two new stems coming through. Some of them even have more than that, some of them have 3 or 4. So it's nice and bushy now, loads of stems, so we'll get a lot more flowers when it's planted. So I'll now take you outside and I'll show you how to separate the sweet peas and how to plant them out. So I'm going to be planting my sweet peas in this pot here. Now when it comes to positioning, you want to make sure you got a nice sunny position. Sweet peas, they don't flower well unless they've got good amounts of sunshine, so make sure it's a really nice sunny position, they get plenty of sunlight. So I could have put just the one plant in there just as it is, but you can see they're very congested. The roots are going to be battling for space, and also the leaves will be battling for space as well. So we really need to spread them out and we need to separate them. So to do this, we just want to first of all gently take them out of the existing pot. Now sweet peas have very delicate roots, so you want to try and disturb the roots as little as possible. So I'm just going to gently tip it upside down, put a little bit of pressure on the back of the pot, squeeze the side slightly as well, and just shake it at the same time, and it should just gently pop out like that. And you can see there, we got all these nice healthy roots. You know they're healthy because they're white. If the roots are going brown, or if they're soft and rotten, then they're not doing as well. So to separate them, the easiest way is just to gently push and squeeze the root ball like this, and then start to tease apart as well. So you want to have a look, and you can see here there's one separate already, so that'll make it easier. I'm just going to gently pull that away. And the same with the other ones, just kind of gently tease it apart. And we'll start off by just separating it in half, like so. And then with the smaller half here, I'm just going to continue the process. So we got one here, that looks like it's quite a bit on its own. Just going to gently tease it apart, and we'll separate it there, and I'll have a really good root system. And then these three will be a little bit more tricky. I'm just going to take off an individual plant and gently pull it. And you can see there, we're taking it out with a nice root system, and this one as well. These two are now nicely separated. So I'm going to continue this with all the plants and get them nicely separated. If you're doing this, make sure you don't do it on a really hot sunny day because the roots will dry out quite quickly. So that's all my plants now separated, and I'm just going to go ahead and plant them around my pot evenly spaced. And you want to be fairly quick with this. You don't want them exposed too long because the roots will quickly start to dry out and that will damage the plant. So I'm just going to quickly go ahead now and get these all planted. Planting depth wise, you just want to plant them about as deep as they were in the pot. So if you look at the stems, you should notice there's a white bit and then it goes green. You want to have the soil around about the transition between green and white. That's about the level that you want the soil. So you can see there I've gone from a pot that was really crammed with lots of plants to a pot that's nicely evenly spaced with all the plants. I do actually have 2 spare. I don't think there's any point putting these in because there's already plenty of plants in here, so I'm just going to use these elsewhere in the garden And that's something else you can do with this. You can just buy 1 or 2 pots and you can have loads and loads of sweet peas, because each pot probably contained about 15 plants or so. So once you've got them all planted, what you'll want to do is you'll want to go ahead and give this a really good watering. If it's in a pot like this, if you can, put it somewhere a little bit shadier just for a few days until the roots get re-established. Because the roots have been damaged a bit, it won't be able to absorb as much water as normal, and you might find that these will if they're in some really hot sunshine. So if you can, put it somewhere a bit shaded just for 3 or 4 days until they get acclimatized, and then put them back in a nice sunny position. Keep it well watered and they should grow well for you. And then once you get some good growth coming through on them, give them some tomato feed, and that should encourage good flowering. If they're looking a bit weak, you can give them a balanced feed or even a high nitrogen feed just to give them a boost, but generally it should be fine just with a tomato feed. They're leguminous plants, they can make their own nitrogen, so they shouldn't need much nitrogen. So when it comes to supports, I tend to make it like a wigwam kind of shape using bamboo canes. But there's one issue with that. The way that the sweet peas climb is they have tendrils. Now these are quite young plants, so they don't have tendrils yet, but once they feel that they're starting to get flopped around the wind, they'll start to grow quite long tendrils. These were quite short, and I had them in a location where there was no wind at all when I was doing the time lapse, so they haven't actually formed any tendrils yet. There's one that's just forming one, I can show you here. So you can see on this plant there's a small little like whip coming off of it. That's the actual tendril. They will get much longer. As I say, these plants are only just starting to make tendrils because they weren't in an exposed location, but you'll get much longer ones of these starting to come out once they start getting established. And this is how the plants actually climb onto things. So these will grow out. As soon as they touch something, they'll spiral around it and grab onto that object, and that's how the peas climb onto things. So the problem with having something like a bamboo cane, and I personally do use bamboo canes for the main structure of my wigwams, is they're very thick, so you can see they're about the thickness of a human finger. The tendril, it can't wrap all the way around that. You can maybe start wrapping around part of it, but it has to wrap around several times to get a good purchase. So the bamboo cane is actually no good for it. It won't be able to grow up it. So what you have to make sure is you've got lots of thin supports that the plant can grow up. So what I tend to do is I tend to get twine. So you can see I've got a piece of twine here. This is narrow enough that the tendril can wrap round several times, and you can actually see we've got some old tendrils wrapped around this from previous years, and you'll be able to see there is actually a tendril wrapped around there from previous years. It does wrap round several times, and so if the plant can't do that because it's sitting at the wider bamboo canes, it won't be able to climb properly, and you'll just have plants that are kind of cascading. And also with the sweet peas, they won't put on strong growth until they feel that they are firmly attached to something, so they'll also have stunted growth. So if you can make sure they have good supports, they'll grow much better. So what I do is I tie lots of twine around the thicker supports to make sure there's something thin for them to grow up, and it's good to have them horizontal as well. To have them vertical, it's a little bit more difficult for them to grow. If you can have the twine supports horizontal, they'll do much better. So that's all you need to do for your sweet peas, to separate them and plant them out in spring, and these should be flowering in a couple of months' time. I should get a nice display. And when it comes to the height of the support you need, I normally go for about 5 foot, but it depends on the variety of sweet peas. You can get dwarf ones that only grow a foot tall, or you can get really quite tall ones that grow 6 to 7 foot tall. What I'd also like to mention is the timing about when to plant them out. So sweet peas are slightly frost hardy, but they're not fully frost hardy, so you do need to think about the time of year that you put them out. I would wait until you're towards the end of your frost period in your part of the world, so they can take a slight frost, so -1, -2, they should be absolutely fine. But if you get anything harder than that, they will be killed off or damaged by the frost. So I would plant them out before the last frosts are finished, but towards the end of the frost season, just to make sure that there's not going to be any really hard frosts, and light frosts should be absolutely fine for them.